good evening. Everybody have a seat. First meeting 2024. Glad you all could make it. And we got a great year planned out already. We're going to have a couple of beginners classes. The first one in March is already filled up. We've got another one coming up in June, and then if things work out, October sometime? September. So we're going to have 3 beginners classes. We're looking at having an intermediate level class. So, those are things. We've got a couple of speakers lined up for the, we also have the October show. We're going to have a guest speaker there also. I forget what the names are. Didn't write them down. Anyway, we got a couple of things, a couple of quick announcements before we get into the yamadori presentation. So who's first on the list? Where's John?
So
okay.
First things about the yamadori collection this Saturday, there are still 10 spots open. As far as I know, I haven't checked. There are still 10 spots open for Saturday. We are digging trees in Moscow, Ohio, which is about a 35-minute shot down 52 to the east. Yes. So I'm interested in that. I'll be able to be there by 9 a.m. That's fine. Yeah. 10:30. Yeah. Plan is to get there, scout a little bit, try to pick out your tree, and have enough time to dig it up. I'm thinking get out of there by 4 o'clock, 4:30 at the latest, and leave them be. So the hosts are the Hartmans, Tom and Carol. They're great folks. They're into gardening and trees and all that good stuff. Carol used to be on the board for the Dahlia Association, so you might be able to get a sneak peek at some nice flowers while you're there if you're interested. So that's coming up Saturday. So if you want to get signed up, jump on the website and do so. Scout, dig up the tree, and then bundle it up and Ben will be out there to kind of oversee, maybe assist, dig its own trees and stuff.
It also gives somebody available to call 911 when you step off the edge of the cliff.
That's what we're partnering. There is a lot of different trees. On the property, there are elms, there are beech. I think there's some birch, elms. I think there's some, tulip poplars. There's eastern red cedar. There's no pine trees that I could really find when we're out there, but there is a lot of runoff canals that have a lot of loose trees that'll be ripe for picking. So it's kind of, we didn't go out and scout and mark trees and identify them before we're going out there. We're kind of doing this late season, so it's going to be kind of a deciduous tree roulette.
How do you identify trees that really come?
I've got a book, and we'll cross our fingers. That's what we're here to learn tonight. Okay, could you scoot down? We've got a couple of people. There's some right up front. Another thing, we started back up our first Saturdays at the Crone. We've had 2 of them already, January and February. The first Saturday is going to be the next first Saturday is March 2nd at the Crone. We get there about 9:30 so you can get a good parking place. You come in the back door. If you haven't done that yet, come in the front door or call one of us and we'll tell you how to get in the back way. That way you don't have to pay the $10. But it's still, you get to bring your own trees and your tools and get advice from anybody else who's there, So we've had, I've made a couple, Phil's made a couple, Joanne's made a couple, Bob's made a couple. So, and John, I think you've been there too. So there's a good crowd there. So we can, give you some advice. Yeah, be sure and sign up. So, okay. You want to tell us about the beginners class? Let me turn the camera around.
No, that's okay. The beginners class is happening on March 23rd. That's a Saturday. The class is full. We have 26 new folks coming in to learn about bonsai. And as always, we need folks to assist. So if you have some time on Saturday from 12:30 to 4, please volunteer on the website and come help some new folks learn about bonsai. We're also doing a beginner's class at Sam Adams, which I think is April 12th. That's a Friday from 5:30 to 8:30. It's going to be a small class and an abbreviated class, but we still need folks to volunteer to help in that, and you'll get a free flight of brew and an appetizer if you volunteer. So that'll be pretty fun. That'll be one of our first outside events doing bonsai.
How many volunteers do you have for the March beginners class, and how many do you need?
I think I have 4 for the March beginners class, and there's 26 people in the class, so we need at least 10 to 12 folks. So if you got some time, please volunteer for that. It's a lot of fun.
That's just the afternoon session.
Yeah. The morning session is just me talking for a couple hours. So, yeah, it's pretty boring. So, what else? Oh, tools. For the beginners class, we're trying to build up a collection of tools for folks to use so that the buy-in for them is less. They don't have to go out and purchase a set of tools unless they really want to. So if you got some old tools that you're not using, we need scissors, branch cutters, gin pliers, and wire cutters. So if you've got any old ones, just bring them to the next meeting. We'll happily take them and use them for beginners classes. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Yes. Oh, you'll talk about that. He's sick just like me. No, I've been cured. Had a fever Monday and Tuesday. I've been clean since Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so I'm good. I'm not contagious. Yeah, that's why I've got this mask on. Any other questions?
I do have one other comment.
Oh, yeah.
These two end trees here, the eastern white pine and the hawthorn, are which two?
This one and this one.
The green hawthorn and the eastern red cedar.
They're not dead.
Those are both going to be on the raffle, so if you would like tickets to raffle off those, they are $1 a piece or $6 for $5. Just come up and see me, and I'll have you do some raffle.
Okay. All right, and we'll let Bob introduce the speaker.
So, excuse me, just a couple things to look forward to this year. Working backwards, we have Jennifer coming in April. We're going to have a meeting here and a demo and then a workshop afterwards on that Saturday. Next month in March, we have Stephanie and I are going to do a talk on non-traditional species. So things that people don't often think about for bonsai. And then today, of course, we have Ben Kirkland. I'll talk a little bit about Ben in a second, but we were going to have Paul Weishart here with our pinch pots. Like Steve said, he's sick. He couldn't come today, but he will be here next month. So next month we'll get our pots. So we're excited to have Ben here. I don't remember who it was. It might have been you. Recommended that we reach out to Ben, and I've been watching Ben on YouTube for a couple years, 3 or 4 years probably. It's very entertaining and informative. So if you've never seen his YouTube channel, you should check it out at the Appalachian Bonsai. And he goes all over, primarily Virginia.
That's right.
Collecting bonsai. So it's very yamadori centric. And very informative. He does studies on soil and things like that too. So you'll enjoy watching him on YouTube. Speaking of YouTube, this tree, is that one on YouTube as well?
This one's on YouTube. The collection of this one is on YouTube, and the collection of this one is on YouTube.
So if you win this one, you get a famous TV tree. So keep that in mind. So Ben, in addition to being a self-taught bonsai artist, YouTube influencer,
Content creator.
content creator, He has a kind of a part-time job as a professor at Virginia Tech, teaching industrial design. So we've been working with Ben for 6 or 8 months trying to get him in, and we're happy to have him here today. So thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Bob. Can you take this? All right. Well, thanks everybody for the warm welcome. Bob and Phil and John, they've all reached out to me and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much for the warm welcome. This is not beer, it's just water. Bottled in Bland County, Virginia. The tall boys are Bland County, Virginia. That's right outside of Virginia Tech, which is where I primarily teach design. Design's related to our field here in bonsai world too. But I got into bonsai back in 2007, maybe a little bit younger as a kid, but in 2007 is when I really started researching and focusing on trees. I started reading books. There wasn't much on the internet at that moment. And I started looking at what I could afford because, let's admit it, it's expensive. Bonsai is very expensive. I live in a very rural part of Virginia, a place called Floyd, Virginia. And before that, I was in a place that was called Woolwine, and it's as big as it sounds. I started collecting trees. The books had junipers. They had, your Shimpaku junipers. They had pines. The Japanese black pine, Japanese white pine. Well, I had my eastern white pines and Virginia pines. And I started looking at other things. We have some hawthorns, we got dogwood, maples. Japanese maples are pretty expensive if you go to the nursery. They're sometimes even more expensive when you buy them from a bonsai nursery. But we have red maples, and they work very, very well. Sugar maple to some degree, and then of course some of the other species we have about. That's how I got into collecting native materials and working with them. And once I started having more internet access, because I was in a dead zone where I was, once I got it, I started finding Walter Paul. Many of you know Walter Paul, Austrian-born, lives in Germany. Lots and lots of collection tips and tricks for his collection. I realized that he was picking up Oriental hornbeam, which is Carpinus orientalis, I think is what it is. Well, we've got the American hornbeam, Carpinus caroliniana. I was surrounded with them. They were all around the property. So I started collecting those. They became my favorite tree. I don't have any of them up here. I am, by the way, going to have some notes here. So if you see me messing with my computer, it's just for notes. I got some good images here if you want to check them out later on. Almost all the trees on there are native. They're all native species. And I say native, I mean, North American species. So why is it that we want to use our local material? Well, if you think about what we call Japanese black pine or Japanese white pine or trident maple or Japanese maple, they come from Japan and China and Taiwan and Korea. And they are local to that region. That's why people from China, people from Japan, Taiwan, and Korea use them for their bonsai. We can also use our species very much the same way, using the same techniques, and create some very unique trees. Absolutely beautiful. A benefit of using our local trees is for their resistance to our climates. And I say that they're acclimated already. They're trees in the backyard, they're going to do really fine in your backyard. I was just talking with, was it Leo? Or I was talking with Bob. Who was I talking to about trident maples? The trident maple, if we've all experienced that, they bud out sooner than other ones. And if they freeze, they'll split. And they risk it dying. Well, they're from a warmer climate, and they come out a lot faster. Our trees are much more hardy to our particular zone. So that's why it's nice to have our local material. A ficus is not going to do well outside, during this part of the year. Give them the summer, they should be okay. But they work really well in Florida, because they're kind of local. Another one is their pest resistance. We have a lot of pests that can mess with our Japanese maples and eat them away. Some things are a little bit more hardy to those pests. Like this is a dogwood. No, it did not die because of a pest. It died because of cold snaps after pruning. But there are very few pests that hit this. There's one, it's a little worm. You can see a little wormy section when you get close to here. And I just paid attention to those, but it never affected the leaf. I didn't have any blight. It was, I don't have to spray systemics on them very much. I might have a little bit of a woolly adelgid that will get on my pines, but with a healthy pine, it survives quite well, and I can just walk over and mush it off. The only real punk, if you will, is the cedar apple rust. If y'all know that term. Cedar apple rust is a virus that requires two different trees to propagate. So it will propagate onto the first part of its life cycle on, say, a juniper, in this case the eastern red cedar, and the other life cycle on an apple species or apple family. So this Crataegus, this green hawthorn, is in that apple family, and it can be susceptible to it as well. But for the most part, I don't have to worry about using systemics, using miticide or fungicide, things like that. I don't have to worry about them too much with my native species. Another benefit of using our local trees is the unique character. You know, everybody's probably seen a Japanese white pine. Not too many people see eastern white pine. We all have seen the, say, a Chinese juniper or Shimpaku or Itogawa. We don't see too many eastern red cedars, aka the Virginia juniper. We might see more Rocky Mountain junipers. Anybody got some Rocky Mountain junipers in a collection? No? They used to. Do they look like this? No? Is that what it is? I almost brought one. I've got a little small one at home. But we're starting to see more and more of those used in bonsai, especially here in the United States. One of the difficulties about using something like a native juniper is the foliage can be quite coarse. Even though this is the scale foliage, you can see it's not fine, like you might find with a Shimpaku or with an Itogawa. And it readily puts out juvenile foliage whenever it's been disturbed. So that is a challenge with this particular species. Rocky Mountain juniper, a little bit better. It smells like cat pee, if you've ever been close to them. They do. You'll find people like Bjorn or Ryan Neal. They often graft Itogawa or some other type of Shimpaku varietal onto those beautiful things. But they're doing it because the trunk itself, the characteristics of the bark, the deadwood, the movement, especially of yamadori, is quite beautiful. Another thing I like about native species is that it's familiar to us, right? If I have somebody come into my backyard, I don't have a proper garden. I got a backyard. They come in my backyard, they're like, is that a pine? Like, is that? And I'm like, yeah. They're pointing to a tree in the background. I was like, yes, it's the same thing. Like, I thought bonsai was like a tree. It's like, it is a tree. But it's a lot of different types of trees. And whenever I can show them that you can use the same stuff that's in your backyard, they get a little bit more interested, right? Like, this is out in the middle of a cow field, and people look at it as trash. You know, the farmer, a friend of mine who I collected this from his property, he said, yeah, take them all. But you can actually use that? Yeah, I can. And it's got some interesting characteristics. This is a sad one for me because it's one I've had for a long time, and it died just this past year. But it's a dogwood. It's an American dogwood, or a flowering dogwood, which is a Cornus florida. Whenever you see like a dogwood, which is our state tree in Virginia, people get excited. Like, you've got a dogwood in a pot and it's that big? Yeah, I do. And lastly, one of the great benefits about using native materials is that the training techniques that we use for bonsai apply very much species to species. There are challenges, like this is an eastern white pine. It does not respond as well as, say, a Japanese white pine. It's a five needle pine. It will take the same training techniques, but it can be quite coarse. This is also an eastern white pine. And you can see it's got some different foliage, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's my brother. Juniper responds much the same way. If you've ever used a Japanese maple or a trident maple, a red maple actually does quite well. I've got a beautiful image on here that I'll show you. I'll turn it around in a second and show you. But you can train a red maple and reduce the foliage and have these gorgeous, gorgeous leaves, absolutely stunning leaves. But just like the maples that we see in traditional bonsai species, we can apply those into our native species. So we can relate these things all together. There we go. I don't know if you can see that. That's at the North Carolina Arboretum. You're welcome to come up here afterwards and you can check it out. All these images. But that those leaves are only about that big. I've got another image of it here so you can see the human scale. There we go. This is, I arrived a little late on this year. But this is actually last year, 2023. And it's probably about that tall. Absolutely beautiful red maple. So I've got a bunch of trees here I was wanting to show. We have a lot of unique species too that are not often used. We have some burning bushes around the area that I've seen. A lot of people use those. North America has one as well. It's called the American Wahoo, and it has a really, really pretty bloom in wintertime. So if you're doing a winter silhouette, it has a really, really nice bloom. Works really well for like a windswept because the Wahoo has these really long, thin and long nodes in between them. So whenever you wire it, you can wire it much like you could say a willow blowing in the breeze. But it'll have these big pinkish reddish blossoms on the end. Really, really pretty. Sometimes called a strawberry bush. If you ever heard that term, strawberry bush is another one. Sorry, I got a whole bunch of images there. Let's talk about these trees in particular. This is a Crataegus viridis. This is a green hawthorn. This was dug out of a cow field. In fact, most of these were dug out of pasture. All of them, except for this one. This was dug in the woods. But the rest were dug out of pastures. And it was bent and twisted and browsed upon by cattle. And this particular one had goats also out there. I find that pastures are excellent places to look for raw materials. One of the reasons is that it's wide open. You can often drive. The farmer's going to be driving their tractors or their trucks up there. You can walk up there. Don't take your dogs. You can drive directly to the tree, collect it, and bring it back with permissions, of course. They have unique character, as I mentioned. Native species, especially yamadori, have some really unique characteristics to them. And the farmers will be glad to get rid of bumps in the road, if you will. Let's go over to this one. Eastern white pine, again, a cow field. That trunk was done by cattle. I didn't do that. The broken branches up at the top, done by cattle. I didn't do that. Locked out.
All the white pines, I see it over the
Thank you.
Perfect, perfect.
Shut the door.
Perfect, perfect. I can talk about the training of this tree in a minute, but if we want to go into that. But when it comes to the yamadori, you know, this had, when I was looking at it, I saw a lot of different eastern white pines in the field. This one had the most character. This one had the movement. It also had all of these, all this branching happening. It's a result of a whirl, which sometimes is not beneficial for our white pine or our pine design. But with this broken trunk up here, it looks just like some event has happened, cows, but some other event has happened, and then all of this branching is grown in this way. With the trunk being as twisted, this happened because of damage. It happened because of the life it's lived. The branching around it should reflect that, right? If this was, all of these branches were straight and orderly, that would look incongruent with the way this trunk is naturally done. I can't undo this. So I should work with this and make it look as twisted and gnarled and beat up as the rest of the trunk. If this were straight, then maybe the branches being more straight would make sense, and twisted branches would look weird. But in this case, I've got a weird trunk, so I should have some weird branches. And I'm still working on the weirdness of it. This was not there, and I did not do that on purpose. This showed up about 2 years ago. I was cleaning it up. It was during my repot, and I just took a little brass brush and I was just kind of cleaning some of the lichen. You can see there's lichen on here. Just cleaning some of the lichen off, and I noticed that little piece of bark flaked off. So I fished it out until I found the dead wood. Doing that could be a good thing. One, it adds some unique character. Two, it prevents bugs and moisture and other things from getting in there. And you don't want to have that happen. That can create problems. The problems can also create good features. And in this case, I got both, right? Got rid of a problem and also created a cool feature.
Then the lichen, will that hurt the bark or hurt the bottom of the tree, or?
I've heard both. I don't mind it so much, but I think it holds a little bit more moisture than what I want. So I don't mind peeling it away. It being a pine and not one that's ready for show. If some of the bark flakes off, it's going to flake, those plates are going to come right back. We were talking about the wire bite in this one. If you look close to all of these, there's going to be some wire bite in all of them. Thankfully with a pine that it'll flake and be less noticeable. This one has got some flaky bark on it, and that would be good. Eventually, maybe on this one, but my hornbeams, they'll hold those forever. So I do have to pay attention. This is the last of the cowfield trees on the bench today. This was right next to a path, and so it kept getting trampled on and trampled on and trampled on. And all of this dead wood was inherent. I didn't create that. That was part of it. If you look really closely, you'll see it's got lichen. It's got some things. It's got some moss, and if you dig with your fingernail, you can feel it's damp, and it's kind of peeling away that bark. And now I have pretty dead wood again. I hope y'all, one of you who gets this tree and this tree are going to enjoy those things. This was a horse pasture. And again, it's just a dogwood. It was about, I could see over the top of it, but it had this size trunk on it. It has some unique character. It had a limb off the side. None of this branching though. All this branching was grown over the course of 7 years. And it was starting to look really good, and then it really hurt my feelings.
Did you do any cleaning of the ground before you took it out?
I did no pruning on the ground with any of these. I mean, I got as big a root ball as I could. We'll talk about safety in a minute, but you don't want to have something that you can't carry out safely. And in this case, I got a root ball that was about that big around, and got it home, took out the old soil, cleaned up my cuts, and then had it in a pot and slowly reduced it over years. Feel free to ask more questions though, by the way. This was 7 years. And last year, it had a really beautiful mass of roots, and I pruned it to about right there, if you can imagine. It was in a small pot. I've got a picture of it. The pot was about that big. And I did not reduce the roots really sharp. I cleaned them up afterwards, after it died. But they kind of break off. They're kind of fine. But I left about a 1/2 inch gap all the way around on the pot. So I had plenty of root mass in there, along with 4 other trees, good root mass. And then we had a massive freeze. And I don't think I protected them enough. I think they were still vulnerable. And I lost 5 of my best trees. This one and 4 other ones.
Did they ever bloom for you?
That one never did. This one actually leafed out. The other ones did not leaf out. This one leafed out. But it never did come to bloom. This one does. So as mentioned, this is apple family. Crataegus or hawthorn. They're part of the apple family. This produces beautiful little small white clusters. So I have little small white flowers, and it'll be clusters of them and clusters of them and clusters of them. And this one's bloomed the last 3 years. Really, really nice. The berries will turn red in fall, but I've cut them off every year.
Why do you do that?
I cut off the berries to save energy. So the tree expends a lot of resources producing fruit and flowers. You may hear some people will, like a Satsuki azalea, they'll go ahead and cut all the blooms off, which will allow it to set new buds, but also prevent it from going into fruit.
So that one includes the flowers that you cut out.
I cut off the blooms. I've let it grow fruit before. They're really pretty red in the fall. But while trying to grow this out, I like to see the fruit. I do. But also I know that I need to look forward to the future a little bit more. So there was a time in this design where I had hoped to get it to be more ramified, to have flowers all over the place, and then have a nice display of red fruits in the fall time. I haven't gotten that far with it. It's still got some years to go. One of y'all will eventually take hold of that one. Yeah. So, collecting trees. There are a couple of things I'd like to keep in mind when I'm looking for trees. One is size, for sure. So in the case of this has got a big, beefy trunk. It had low branching, right? I didn't have to worry about a trunk that was 5 or 6 feet tall. And on white pine, it doesn't back bud very well. So having lower branching, I'm looking for characteristics that I can deal with down the road. With white pine, it often has, really long foliage. So I want a trunk that's large enough to make that proportion look right. It looks better in scale. This one's not as beefy, right? That's much finer trunk, much more slim. But I chose this one, I dug this one up because of its low branching and because of its fine foliage. This is genetic. I can reduce this, but most of this was genetic. I've had this one longer, and it's still this long foliage. About half of what it was when I collected it. But this one has always been diminutive in size. So genetics are an important part too. With the collection of this one, again, I'm looking for the size. I need something that I'm not going to have to fight for a long time. I like to develop a little bit more quickly. So this one already had some taper to it, right? It had this kind of fat trunk. It had a good flare in the roots. And then it had multiple trunks coming out, and I could choose one that was adding more taper to it. It's just going to keep breaking. But, we go from a larger size to a little bit smaller size. I let this grow out to a little bit smaller size, and I cut that, a little bit smaller size. So we're getting some taper, we're getting some movement. And I chose this tree for those reasons. This one was chosen for those reasons too. It's got a very large bulbous trunk here. And then it gets a little bit smaller. That was an old root that needs to be carved up, whoever gets this. It had a trunk that was quite tall here, but I like the movement and direction of this branch, and it got smaller, and it got a little bit smaller, and I had a section here die, unfortunately, so that's gotten carved. But I'm looking for characteristics that we find advantageous in our practice in the tree before I ever dig it up. I want it to be good. I don't just dig it up because, it's a white pine. I dig it up because it has characteristics that I can work with. So I'm looking for that. And this one just had some cool features. It's got all this deadwood in there. It had twin trunks, one of which is dead and broken. So we have some a deadwood feature here, a gin. As mentioned, the eastern red cedar is not the best species to be using because of its coarse foliage, but I couldn't pass that one up. Right? I would prefer something a little bit larger to balance out the coarse nature of this foliage, but I couldn't pass that one up. Sometimes you just can't, help yourself, and you need to grab that one up. When it comes to tools, actually collecting them, I usually use a trench shovel, garden shovel. I don't use the large spade, I use a small spade. This is a lot lighter to carry, it doesn't have as long a handle, and it goes into the ground, especially where I am in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it's rocky. So this can go through rock a little bit easier. This is one of my favorite tools, loppers, excellent for roots, excellent for also taking the top off of a trunk if you need to. So this one was just about that tall, and I pruned it down to, 2 feet maybe, 1.5 feet, 2 feet before I went ahead and cut it off. I also keep all my collecting tools together. I don't carry them into the woods this way normally, I put them in a bag. But I keep them together, that way I'm not scrambling during collection season looking for them. I keep a small spade. You know, this thing is good for digging down, good for prying. It's got a little serrated edge. This was a gift, but this thing is awesome. Really, really awesome. If you don't have one of those, a little garden shovel works well. You can also use it to take out loose dirt once you're kind of getting around. I'll talk about how I collect trees in a second. I keep marking tape because not all times of the year are good to collect trees, right? We work on our trees at specific times during the year. Collecting trees is about the same. So I collect my trees in mid-February to maybe mid-March. But in any other time of the year, I can take this out in the woods, tie it to the tree. I can mark down or take a photo of it with my phone and know where I'm going. It's easy to see this in the winter. Saws are essential, so I keep these on hand. Very, very handy to have. It is. It sure is. But it's sharp. I keep an old pair of bonsai shears. So I've got nice ones for when I'm working on a tree. But if I need to get roots, that's hard to beat a good pair of bonsai shears. These are awesome. So if I'm getting up underneath that tree, that just works so well to get fine roots. And I got a couple of other tools up here, including rock hammer, which I've had to use just once. But not a bad tool to have on hand. There are a couple of other tools that you can throw in there. We all get attached to our tools. I do use an old pair of concave cutters, and I do use a root hook from time to time.
Where's your Band-Aid?
They were on my finger earlier today. Thankfully, I've never been seriously harmed in the digging of a tree. After I found a tree and I got my tools together, I like to dig out a trench around the tree. I look at the size of the trunk and what I can carry, and I'll go ahead and dig a trench all the way around the tree about, 5 to 6 times the width of the base. So in the case of this pine, that's a 2-inch trunk, thereabouts. So I'm going to dig, maybe 5-6 inches on the outside of that all the way around. And then I'll dig another section just wide enough for the spade outside of that. So it's a hole, just kind of shovel in around, and then I'll go out of that and shovel that around, and I'll remove that whole moat. I create a moat. And what that allows me to do is actually get under the tree easily. If I just dig down in and start prying, I don't know what those roots look like. I don't know what I'm going to encounter. So if I can dig a trench around the tree, a moat, if you will, then I can see what roots I need to cut. So that's what the lopers are for, or the saw is for. I can also get under the tree and use my scissors. I can also get more leverage because I can come, if you will, attack at a better angle to get up under the tree. And that's the case I've done with all of these. Some of them require bigger moats than others. This one took a bigger moat for some reason. But that was a good size one. This one was working around rock, so I had to be very careful with that one. That one was quite easy because it was so small. This was in the woods, and it was quite loamy, so it was very soft, and I got that one out of the ground quite quickly. This was a clay soil, and I got the whole root ball with that one. I was amazed. It just came out. I didn't have to do any major cutting. It just came right out of the ground. If you're going in the woods, be careful, right? As we mentioned, we got some rocky areas, some interesting terrain. I've got an image of some of our club members, which you're again welcome to see. We're on an incline. It's a sandy bank. It's on the Roanoke River, digging up hornbeams. And people did not go because of the steep terrain. I know that some people have some concerns for that reason. Brian McCrodden, he's in his 80s. He's right here. He slipped and fell, and we had to have one person pick him up, and then I was underneath him getting his leg out from a root. He had slipped through a root on the way down, and it buckled up underneath him. And he had just had his knee replaced. He's fine, though. I get to see him in 3 weeks. I'm excited to catch up with him again. But yeah, I didn't even mention this. I'm part of the Anoki Bonsai Club in Roanoke. So y'all are a wonderful club inviting me out here. We have our own club down there. But we like to go out and collect trees from time to time. So always have some friends or have somebody know that you're going out in the woods. Important. If you're working roadside, which I've worked roadside, I carry a high-vis vest. It actually stays in my car because I can't help myself. I'll get out of the car on an interstate or a highway. And I'll go ahead and I'll flag a tree, you know, or I'll find who lives there. Like I'll get out of the car and I'll just take a look at it and like, okay, take a picture, and then I'll contact the owner and see if I can come back and collect it. Yes.
Ben, I think at least one of your videos, maybe you talked about the legality of roadside hunting.
Yes, if you have permission from the owner, that's not a problem. But if it's highway or interstate or in a national forest, you're going to have to get permissions for sure. If it's national forest, you need to contact the ranger station. There can be a fee, like $25, $30 per tree that you can collect. And I think there's like a limit. It's almost like if you're hunting, you know, you get a bag limit on something. And there may be certain areas you're not allowed to collect. Right outside of Blacksburg, Virginia is Jefferson National Forest. And so that's really good collecting grounds there. But also places you should not collect. I got pictures of the Buffalo Mountain, which is my local place, my little hidey hole, if you will, but not for collecting. It is for sightseeing. It's a nice overview. It's the tallest mountain in the county. There are places where you don't want to collect because it's going to create an ecological problem. That's a protected area. I'm not going to even question it. I'm just not going to do it. I'll appreciate it. I'll take some beautiful photos and go away. Back to your question, though, collecting on the roadside like the interstate or highway requires heavy fees into the thousands of dollars. So I've definitely stopped and looked at trees, not collected them on the interstate. I-81, mile marker 89, heading up, has these gorgeous like scree slopes and they're covered in pines. And I'll stop and I'll take a look. I've never collected one. I wanted to so bad. But I have not. There's a problem with illegally collecting a tree, and that is that we kind of spread a bad name amongst us as peoples, right? Enthusiasts. What else did I want to say about that? Things to consider are the genetics of a tree, like the species. Can you keep it alive? Do you know how to work a pine? Can you keep it alive? Hopefully you can. I don't know of anybody that's never killed a tree. Genetics is a good one. Like this is going to have really long foliage. I got lucky. I found one that had really short foliage when it came to this. You were saying that we've got beech on the property. Is that right?
Yeah, there's beech.
One of the things with beech is it's Fagus grandifoliae. Grandifoliae is grand foliage. It's large foliage. So it may be beneficial for you to look at something with a little bit more girth, a little bit larger size. That way when it does leaf out, the foliage will look a little bit more to scale. You can have a small one. I've got an image of one on here. I don't know if I got the full image of the tree, but I know it's there. Really poor images, I'm sorry. It's maybe about that tall, but it's got a pretty large trunk on there. And the leaves have been reduced down to maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches in length. Yes?
Very pushing on beech, but my family has a farm with all sugar maple and beech. I went to flag a few beeches.
Mm-hmm.
But I find a lot of times the trees are like suckers that are coming off of like the parent tree's roots.
Yep.
Is there a I guess can you collect those anywhere, or you pretty much have to find the soil?
I've tried collecting off of a sucker and I killed it. I don't have a proper answer to how to keep it alive. I've heard of people scoring the sides of the root to try and promote new roots coming there and then coming back and collecting it. I've never done it though. Yeah.
Do you remove, like, you're likely to have a lot of clay. Do you remove all the clay, 100%, go right in?
I'm mixed on this.
What's your, yeah.
So this was definitely a fully clayed body. I removed all of it because water doesn't penetrate clay very well. It doesn't. I did rinse the roots off. I don't wash my roots anymore.
Like, did you get it off by soaking them or spraying?
I used a-
Otherwise, you would lose all your fine roots.
I used a chopstick
Okay.
and I worked through there and I hit it with the heavy part of the hose just as hard as I could. I will still clear out old soil, but in the case of, say, I can't remember which one it was. Maybe it was this pine. I left a good bit of soil on the roots. I didn't, I took anything loose and kind of shook it off, but if it stayed on there, it went in the pot. It's got mycorrhiza, it's got beneficial bacteria.
So what kind of soil do you plant these
I put them in bonsai soil
in?
immediately. I do. I've got I'm sure many of us make our own mixes. I've been making my own mix for a while. It's turfus, it's pine bark. I've used diatomaceous earth, I've used sand. Sometimes I've used peat moss, but I don't use much peat moss. Soil's a contentious one, for sure. The Arboretum, the North Carolina Arboretum, I'm good friends with them. They use, it's expanded shale, I can't think of the name of it, permatil. They use permatil that is made in North Carolina, so it's local, and they get it sifted to their size, which they don't normally do. They use pine bark and they use peat moss, and that's it. And they also use that in their cuttings. They use it in their bonsai. They use it in the stuff that's in the ground. They use it for all their things. It's one mix for all for me. It's another benefit here. Another thing when it comes to the size, if you will, is the time and the species. I don't know if you've got many, what are they called? Hemlocks. Do you have, not Carolina hemlock, Canadian hemlock? Canadian hemlock is a really slow grower.
A little bit further south towards the gorge in Kentucky.
Okay.
There are some hemlocks down there.
The western hemlock grows very fast. Our eastern hemlock grows very, very slow. It'll take a very long time for a collected tree, even one grown from seed, to look like a good bonsai. Where do you want to spend your time? Right? How much time do you want to spend on a particular tree, hoping that it looks good in the future? Maybe look for something that has characteristics that can be advanced more quickly, for sure. This one I've had, this is one of the first collected trees I ever had. 2011 maybe? 2010, 2011. You can see how much work has gone into it, maybe. There's been a lot of work in this and it still looks like this. Where do you want to spend your time? This one was collected in 2017. And it's much more along, right? So there's a 5-6 year difference between that one and this one. Granted, they're different species, but this one was able to be developed much more quickly. So those were some lessons that I learned. What else? I think that might be it that I have at the moment. What questions do you have?
Do you carry burlap box or wrap the root ball, or just grab the dirt?
I usually bring some plastic bags. When it comes to collecting a tree, hopefully you can carry the tree out. That's an important factor. You're not just carrying the tree, you're also carrying all the dirt that comes with it. I've never collected a tree, back it up. I've only collected one tree that I required somebody else's help with. And it was a hawthorn that stood about that tall. And I've still got it. Actually, it's that tree. So I don't know if you can see the root ball. Some of you will come up here and see there's a root ball here that's quite large. and that required 2 people to move. But for the most part, I collect them at about this size, and I can put them in a grocery bag or a couple of grocery bags. Tie that bag up, or a trash bag. Those are a little more durable than a, Kroger bag or something. Yes.
I'm sorry.
With repotting the yamadori, are you just leaving it for growing season, or do you start supplying growing maybe from the sky?
Okay. That's a good question. Whenever I collect a tree, I leave it alone. I let it grow. I let it grow for a full year. I don't touch it. I might prune the top. For instance, this one I did do some light pruning. I did some heavy pruning. I cut the top off. I cut the branch off. I cut it off to a reasonable size. The root ball was, even these large roots here, they were out to there when I first collected it. And I just let it grow. I did no training on it. I didn't even fertilize it until it started to bloom. I didn't even water it until I saw that there was uptake in the roots. Let it survive. I've got pictures here of 2 trees. It's actually one of those over there. Where are you? There. And when you come up and see this, I actually let this one grow for 2 years without touching it. So I did some curing of the tree in the pot and then left it for 2 years. Let it get healthy, let it get strong. And then I styled this for the first time last year. You had a question.
Talk about different soils, right? Different mixes. What's your mix?
My mix is going to be about a 60 to 70% inorganic material. I use turfus for most of that, sometimes diatomaceous earth, just as a splash. And then the rest of it, the 40%, 30% is pine bark. So you're welcome to come up here and dig into it. It's very coarse. I sift it with a 1/4-inch screen to get the heavies out, and then I'll come back with a window screen. So it's about 1/4 inch to say 1/16 of an inch, maybe 2 millimeters, 6 millimeters, something like that. Yes.
Talk about the root balls a little bit more, because you said about so far from the tree, but some of those roots can be pretty far. You cut them off, there's not a lot left. So then you put anything root stimulator on it or anything like that?
I have done some root stimulator. Some of the deciduous trees can have those big, heavy, roots coming out with no fine roots. Deciduous tree can put out adventitious roots much more readily than a pine can. The pines, this one did have a much larger pot. Both of these have much larger pots. To gauge how big that root ball was, I did dig around a little bit to try to see where the finer roots were. I've only had, say, 2 or 3 that I had to cut a massive root off of it. And in most cases, that one being the exception, they died. Didn't know that until I got under there.
So what's the process that you use for trimming the tree back before you dig it up? Is there, how much do you cut off? Do you cut any off before you dig it up?
Yeah, before I dig it up, if it's a tall tree and it might be larger, I'll leave most of it on so I can use it as leverage, right? There's a good image in here of this hornbeam that we're collecting, and we kept all of it up until, where are you? We actually left most of it on there so that we have somebody who can hold it and can manipulate it back and forth before they get up underneath. Once we got the root ball out, then we cut it down to size. Getting it into the car can be a challenge if it's a big, tall tree. You're going to be cutting it down anyway. Go ahead and cut it down anyway. But I do that after I've got it out of the ground. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I have dogwood in my foundation home that I was thinking that I was going to have to remove because it's gotten so tall, and I tried to prune it back, and it doesn't look there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I never thought of trying to make those out. I'll have to look at some things, but should I just lop it off and see what happens?
If you're going to lop it off, you might consider digging it up at the same time. I don't think it'd be a problem for you to cut it and see what happens. It's probably going to live. It should. But if you're going to start the process of making it into a bonsai, go for it. That's going to be my...
I never thought of it, so
It can be a little bit of a challenge with this. it's got the opposite branches, opposing branches with that strong center, much like a maple. They like to grow vertically, and I have to bring them down from time to time. And I have to chase it back. This has been chased back multiple times.
Well, this one has gotten, it's probably 12, 15 feet.
How big is it?
I never considered looking at that. It's just like, I gotta cut these tops off. And it didn't make it come out, the lower branches.
It's worth a shot. If you're wanting to get rid of it, try it.
I was gonna replace it.
My old business got rid of several dogwoods whenever they were tearing out the old building and putting up a new one. And I tried to collect those dogwoods around them, but they turned out to be much more massive than I was willing to do. I had to pay attention to where that branching was, and I decided not to.
Well, it doesn't have any branches like lower than that now, because I keep trying to cut it back, cut big pieces off the top, and it wouldn't come out.
Who wants to come and help collect the tree?
I think we're gonna need to lock it and see if you can get it right back. Then,
Well, I was
if you don't have anything within, 6 inches, it's not worth
It may not be.
it. Yeah, you gotta have something within 6 inches.
it was a Cherokee chief.
Don't know. Try it out.
It's red.
What Walter Paul has done with some really large trunks is go ahead and let them go wild and crazy. Kind of like how this has got the whorl around it, and then it'll hollow it out, and it looks like a very large tree that's got its top broken off, and then it's budded back again. North Carolina Arboretum has a very nice elm that they grew in the ground. It was an air layer. They did 4 of them, and 3 they grew in the container, and then the 4th one they let in the ground, and they let it get big and tall, and they cut it back, and they let it grow up a little, recover, and then they cut it back, and so it created taper and girth and these beautiful, twisted, weird-looking things, and then they finally took it out of the ground and put it into a pot. And it looks like a massive oak tree. In this case, it's an elm. But the top has been completely destroyed, and then it's, grown back again.
How long did that process take for them on the big one?
I think it was 10 years, 12 years for that one, for sure. It's now on display. It went from being in the ground for about 10 to 12 years into a pot, and then grown for about 3 years, and then into its final container, another process of about 3 years. And it's on display.
So after you collect it, do you do anything special with the sun exposure for the first season?
Not for the first season, but for the first couple of months. Maybe that's the season. When I think about the season, I'm thinking about the whole year. I'm sorry. I want to make sure it's protected from wind, from strong direct sunlight. If it's something like this pine, the pine likes the sun. And I will make sure that it gets good either morning or afternoon sun. But I'll try to protect the pot. I don't want those roots heating up too much.
How do you do that?
You can heal it with some mulch to keep the temperature fluctuations from going crazy. I do keep a windscreen around that can be boards. When I first started collecting, I just had boards to keep my dogs out. I've also put up fencing with proper sunshade, but also on the sides. North side of the house isn't bad because it can get a little bit of morning, then it's blocked by the afternoon, maybe a little bit of afternoon sun. I also try not to water them whenever they first collected them. I'll water them to soak the pot, then I'll just make sure it doesn't dry out. I don't re-water this again until it starts pushing blooms, starts pushing leaves. Because I don't want to waterlog it. Root rot's a problem. And I don't want to, I guess it's not going to be taking up water until it starts pushing out buds. So why water it? If that makes sense.
Back in the ground?
I put them on top of the ground. Yeah, directly in the pot, on the ground, and then heal it with mulch.
I mean, replant them in the ground after collection, you ever do that?
I have.
Speed up the process.
I have done that. I've done that with viburnum. We have a possum haw viburnum. And we put them all into the ground. We use old bonsai soil. And they did quite well. I came back 2 years later, and I had to dig them up again. They grew quite well. Very fine bark on them, too, much like a dogwood. Yes?
Could you elaborate more on the eastern red cedar? Because it's not a tree I usually see bonsai, but I've always really liked that tree. I really like native trees. so thin and I can never figure out how to make it look good.
That's why I'm thinking maybe a larger trunk. You know, I mentioned the Arboretum a lot, and that's only because I work with them. I'll be there in 3 weeks filming another project. They've got one that's about 3 feet tall, maybe 4 feet, and it's kind of a bunjin style with a nice foliage pad up at the top. We have a friend in our club that says this finer foliage, if you will, the scale foliage, will be produced the longer you leave it in a pot. When the root ball gets nice and tight, it starts producing more and more of the scale foliage, the mature foliage versus the juvenile foliage. However, you do a hard prune on it, it's going to pop out that really sharp foliage. Do you have any sensitivities to juniper? Because this will make your skin irritate. Yeah. It'll stick everywhere. Common juniper, which we also have here in the States, is used a lot in bonsai. It's actually a global, you know, it's all around the world. It'll stick you like a bunch of needles. I wear gloves whenever I collect. Yes, sir.
I've probably watched you since 2018 or something like that. So be careful with this question. How's your dog?
Which one? I've had multiple dogs in my videos. At the beginning, I had 3. I had a black and white dog. He passed first. I had 2 little healer shepherd mixes. The dark one passed from cancer 4 years ago. And then the white one I had to put down last year. And I've got a puppy, a little Rocky. Little Rocky's still chewing up my trees. Yeah.
One of the things I'm curious about, with people collecting, you guys collected, or at least one of the years I sort of collected honeysuckle.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a problem around here. I took a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually have a lot of characters, so I didn't want to talk about that as an invasive species and how they could be beneficial.
I think it's good. Yeah, I've got an invasive Amber honeysuckle. It's from Pakistan, and it's got some really cool movement to it. It turned out that the middle died, so now it looks almost like a little twin trunk, but it's still connected at the base. Easy to collect. It grows fast. That's why it's invasive. So you can, like, what if you killed it? You killed an invasive species, right? You kill one that we don't want. But in the meantime, you can also have one that can add beauty to your garden. It blooms. I don't know if yours bloom, but mine definitely blooms. I've got a bittersweet vine in my girlfriend's backyard. I'm going to collect it this year. You know, it's an invasive species, but it's got this really large base. It has 4 big trunks coming out the top of it. It was massive. It's getting out of her garden and it's coming into mine. What other questions might you have?
Have you worked with any locusts, either honey or black?
I have not. I've had one that was given to me and I put it in the ground. I like black locust. We use it for firewood. It's really, really good. Honey locust honey and black locust, much like the Crataegus, have those thorns on them, and they can be really, really sharp. Honey locust has like that big cluster of them, whereas the black locust, which is a pseudo acacia, will have kind of singular thorns, but all the way around. Yes.
You ever bonsai tulip?
No. Tulip tree.
Someone had mentioned there were going to be
Tulip poplars?
Yeah, tulip poplar.
Yep.
But it has really soft wood. I've never seen it.
I don't see why it'd be a problem. The leaves can be large, but we were talking about large leaves. Who's got the catalpa? You got the catalpa, and I've seen the plane tree, or what you might call a sycamore. I've seen that get really, really small as well. So try it with the tulip poplar.
One thing also, though, is consider trees with large leaves could potentially be great for winter silhouettes. So while you may not want to view it in the spring or the summer, you might be able to observe it and appreciate it in the winter.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Cypress or bald cypress.
Bald cypress makes an excellent species.
Yeah, do you have any?
I don't own any, but people in my club have them. And I've got a couple of images here. Did you say they're weeds? Well, they got that big, beautiful flared trunk down to the base, and I like them flat topped. I like making our trees as best as I can look like what's in my backyard.
There's a bonsai guy in, well, giving myself away a little bit, but I'm originally from Texas,
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana. But there's a guy in close about 40 miles north of New Orleans that does bonsai. He goes out and collects the trees just like you. He collects water elms, I think.
Water elm? Yes.
He also collects the cypress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he'll get a good trunk, cut it off, plant it, let it go.
They're pretty hardy, and being where we are, even in the Blue Ridge of Virginia, they're hardy enough where we can keep them. The temperatures and weathers are actually very similar to here in Cincinnati. So you may be able to keep some if anybody doesn't have one. Try it out. It's hard for us to keep larch in our area. I don't know if anybody has larch here. What's that? It gets too hot. I think I've only seen one in any of our members as well as in our local. We have a regional display, a regional expo. Only one larch.
Real quick, a plug for another member, Reminiscent Bird Farm. They do sell a lot of bulk cypress bonsai. Potted and ready to go.
Okay. If I can highlight a couple of things here. Just a real quick plug for a friend. Julian Adams is a purveyor of Juicio white pine, and he has been doing that for a long time. He goes to Japan quite often, and he's got a book. He's translated a lot of texts on white pines and black pines, and a lot of information about growing pines. I have used that to my benefit on our native pines. So Eastern white pine is a 5-needle pine, responds much like a Japanese white pine. Virginia pine, Table Mountain pine, pitch pine, very similar to a Japanese black pine. So they respond in the same way. They're a two-flush pine, if you will, like a 2-needle pine. That will flush out twice in 1 year, where these only flush out once in the year. This right here is Harry Harrington. He's a Brit. He does a lot of collecting, mostly of hawthorns and a few other species. He has a website called Bonsai for Me, and it has tips and tricks about how to propagate other species. So beech. He's got a lot of information about collecting beech, if you're interested, especially how to take the little cigars and when to prune those off. There's a timing of the year that's, I think, later, towards late May or June before you want to prune those, as opposed to doing it in the spring, like we do with other species. But within his books, he's got a lot of good information about things like Crataegus, some species we don't often see. And lastly, this is from the Pacific Bonsai Museum up there in Portland. This is a book called Natives, and it's all about native species. So if you haven't looked through these books, feel free to look them, and maybe you can add them to your own collections on some things. When it comes to collecting, I have the YouTube channel, Appalachian Bonsai. You're welcome to check those out. I've got a lot of information. It's self-taught, and so I've made a lot of mistakes, but also I've learned a lot of things. So I've got some tips and tricks in there, but also show you what I'm doing, and maybe you can, copy that, if you will. Any other questions?
For those of us that are going on Saturday with you, could you maybe go through the steps that we're going to take while we're out there, and when we find a tree, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
What's the process that we're going to follow?
I would recommend warm clothes because it's going to be cold.
Yeah, it's going to be cold.
It's definitely going to be cold.
You were right when you emailed in like 10 days ago. It's going to be cold. I'm like, I don't think so.
It's going to be cold. You would probably want to bring some water. Stay hydrated. I know this last weekend was nice. Again, we have similar weather patterns, in my area.
So I found a tree, now what?
Yeah.
What's the first thing I do?
First thing I do is grab your friend and take a picture with it. And then you would want to kind of dig around at the top, around the base. So I can maybe demonstrate here. I'll kind of dig around the top I like gloves on, just because, especially if it's a species like hawthorn, it's going to have thorns. What's that root base look like? Roots are a really important part of the display, not just the way we keep them alive. If it's looking viable, if I'm having to dig deep down and there's no good roots at the top, I have to consider what is that tree going to look like in the future. Because if it's a long taproot, it could look beautiful on the top, but it could look the exact same way underneath. And I'm just going to be fighting a fight that I don't need. Hopefully you'll have a lot of good roots on the outside. Once you kind of clear the duft away from it, you can see what kind of ground you're working with. I would consider, I go straight shovel right around the outside And if I feel a rock, I'll come around the outside or just to the side of it and see if I can find a way in. Maybe I have to dig down and get a rock. If that's the case, I might use this tool until I can kind of clear out some space, dig around a little bit. I will work my way around the tree and then try to get underneath and cut as many fine roots as I can. I like to keep that ball intact. Reason you want to keep that ball intact is not just to protect the roots, but from being disturbed, but also moisture is a key factor. You got to keep them damp. You don't want them drying out. I am not taking any trees home with me. I would love to. I would love to. I've got a 6.5 hour drive, and I want to keep the tree alive, so I don't want to kill it. Unless it's just a stellar specimen. And then I might. Once we collect it, if you got two people, it's easy because somebody can lift up the tree while you bag it up. And it can actually go quite quickly, unless you have to fight it. I had to fight this one a little bit. These other ones I didn't have to fight so much. And by fighting, I mean they were complicated. That had a big root on it. That's why a saw is beneficial. So bring these. I've got 2 in here. I've never had to, I had to pry one from rock, but that was a challenge. May not have been worth it because I don't have it anymore. Yes?
So back to like the taproot discussion, have you often gotten started and decided you really could make a good bonsai out of this?
Yes.
Sorted and go back in?
Yes, I had another dogwood this year, which I started filming and then stopped for that very reason. It turned out that the base, which looked like this beautiful root here, was actually attached to another tree. And cutting that through that would have killed the dogwood and had the chance of also damaging the tree that it was next to. That's a bummer to walk away from a tree. That happened twice this year. I had some small hawthorns and I got close to digging them and found that it wasn't a taproot, it was disease. They all had some type of blight. They were black. I'm not taking that home. So they were sick trees. And I left them in the ground because I didn't want to bring them into my own place.
How many trees do you collect a year?
It used to be 3 or 4. I haven't collected any in about 2 years, 3 years. I went out to collect them and then left them in the ground. Teaching has taken priority for most of my time. In fact, I've gotten rid of several trees just to reduce the amount of time I spend on them. I'm not getting rid of these. It was a bummer that this is gone, but I can let these go.
Your wife told you to stop?
She just gives me the, okay. Are you getting rid of trees? Okay.
What is the bare minimum somebody that's going to start doing this Saturday for the first time that they need to bring as far as tools?
As far as tools, shovel's a good one. A saw or pruners or both. I have hand pruners in here, definitely. So hand pruners, if you've got a shovel, large or small, a hand shovel, and maybe some scissors. Bags. So that's it. Doable.
Can you talk about when you're actually getting a tree from double rocks or something like that?
If you can, you should just be able to pry it.
I think I would learn.
So I've got a rock hammer. I've actually got a pry bar in here too. And you can get in there and pry it a little bit, smack it. It was just enough to get a large rock that I couldn't physically move until I got it loose. And then I got it out. If it's a big one, only time I've ever seen one that I wanted to collect was a hemlock. And I decided that the time it would take me to get this rock apart and to get the hemlock out would be too long. I might damage the hemlock, and a hemlock is obviously a species that's going to take a long time. I didn't collect that one. Walter Paul, however, will use a come-along, and he'll come along some rocks out of the way, mostly from mugo pine, but he's also in the Swiss Alps.
Is he the one that you said that carves out the center?
He's carved out a center on a beautiful, beautiful maple at one point in time. You may recognize him from that big, gorgeous Japanese maple. It's probably about that tall, and it's massive. It's got a lot of faults, and he'll admit that it doesn't follow strict rules when we call rules, guidelines. But it doesn't matter whenever it's in its full leaf. It's a wonderful show. Yes, sir.
Besides like roadside and all those kinds of places you talked about already, how do you go about finding locations like that?
That's a good question. One is have some friends that have property, for sure. I live in a rural area, so I have access to farms, which is where all of these came from in some form or another, except for this one. This was private property as well, but I was the owner. I have driven down country roads, because that's where I have to drive, and I'll see, anybody ever seen a bonsai at 70 miles an hour down the road? I'll see it and I'll keep my eye on it, and I'll see it and I'll keep my eye on it, and hopefully I'll have somebody who's either getting their mail or they'll be out fixing a fence, and I'll stop. I will stop and I will ask them. I'll tell them who I am, what my intentions are. I'm just asking for permission. Would it be possible? If it's in their pasture or their cow field, they're like, yeah, sure, how much you want? And I'm like, no, I'll come and get it. Like, no, how many do you want? And take them all. So it's sometimes it feels embarrassing, but it's good to just get out and like, hey, my name's Ben. I do bonsai trees, and would it be possible for me to take that pine over there? And they often say yes. I've never had anybody say no. How about that?
Another tip is if you know a deer hunters around here.
Yeah.
If you just shadow them, in the fall, take your taste.
Mm-hmm.
If they have rights to that land, then they'll be able to connect you with.
Yeah. Wear blazing orange whenever you got it. That's actually that brings up another point. You don't have to collect in the spring. You can collect in the fall too. Fall collection, you can collect it multiple times depending on where you are. Fall collection can happen around late September to maybe mid to late October. At that time, our trees are producing roots. I don't know if you've ever seen your soil kind of like bump up in the late fall, but trees are producing a lot of roots in the fall time. They're taking all of that energy that they've collected in these leaves and they send it back down into the roots, and that hydraulic motion is pushing water and nutrients from the leaves down in the roots, and it's producing more roots in the fall until they drop off. So you can collect in the fall during that time because those roots are being spread out. In, say, Texas, you can collect like midsummer. We would not do midsummer around here, but there's a dormancy period because it gets too hot. So I've talked to people who collect Texas persimmon, and they say Texas persimmon, you collect it in midsummer because they're dormant at that time. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Depending on where you are and what time of year it is, you could collect certain trees. By the way, for persimmon, I've got some persimmon images here. I've killed a big, beautiful persimmon. Root pruning and the time you collect would be in the fall as well. So they like that more in the fall than they do in the spring. That was a tip that I learned from Julian Adams. I have yet to apply that to a bonsai. That's what he has said is what you're supposed to do. Yeah, go ahead.
Let's see, for the outing Saturday, what's kind of like the best practice for the root mass when we get it home?
When you get it home, that's a good one. I would recommend shaking loose soil. If it's a hard ball of clay, you want to remove that clay because the clay does not allow water to penetrate. But if you can shake it off, sometimes you got to work it with a pair of chopsticks or a root hook, of which I've got both here, just to kind of clear some of that old soil out of there and get fresh soil in there. I also like to take pruning shears and clean up my cuts. So if I've got some ragged edges, I'll go ahead and just clean it up. Hopefully you get as much fine root mass as you can from this. If it's a deciduous tree, less root mass will be okay. But you still want as much as you can. With a pine, you want to collect as much of that root as possible. You can prune it back later, but collect as much as you can. After cleaning the roots off, pruning the roots clean, I go ahead and secure it into a pot with fresh soil, just like I would a normal tree.
You mentioned, if some of the soil that you shake it doesn't come off, is there a recommendation on how much to leave?
I want to have the roots exposed in some regards so they can get fresh soil and nutrients whenever the time for nutrients is coming. I don't want it just sitting in a ball of clay, but I do want to make sure that I keep the mycorrhiza, any fine roots that might be in a little clump, I'd probably leave that clump. If it's dry, I can kind of crush it to feel, if it gets flaky, fine. If it's stuck, I'll get it later. You can always come back and get that. In mountainous regions where, say, a tree is growing in a little pocket of soil, it's going to be a hard root mass. It's going to be really dense. If we're going out in the woods, it's probably going to be much more loose, loamy. I'm expecting that. Unless we get into some really rocky areas.
Technically there is, but it's mostly going to be tall red cedars.
Okay.
So probably not worth collecting, but there might be one or two down there.
All right, we'll take a peek. If it's a really tight root ball, then we might leave more soil on there. If it's really loose, then I don't see why it would be an issue. Do you have another question?
I was just gonna follow up, so it's fall when the roots are growing, and then late winter while they're still dormant?
Late winter, early spring, so like mid to late February up through about mid to late March is whenever I do my collecting.
So you essentially, do you wanna do it before they bud out? Is that what you're looking for? And is there any key, like, oh, it's too late, look at that? Because
Yeah.
the climate is changing a bit.
It is. I like to look for bud swell.
Okay.
The way that I viewed it, and it's been also told to me, is the roots are starting to push nutrition, they're pushing sap, they're pushing fluids into the trunk. And that hydraulic nature is what's pushing, it's not just cell growth, but it's also pushing those buds out. Whenever that's coming into the trunk, it's also one of the reasons why a trident might swell and then split if it gets too cold, because it'll freeze and split. All that nutrition is in that trunk, and that can be like, I call it a battery. Like it'll have enough energy to hopefully sustain it while it quarantines off your cut areas
It's kind of
and then push it back out.
right?
Maple season?
Yeah,
Yeah.
when they're tapping trees.
When they're tapping trees.
Most of that when they're pushing.
In wintertime, most of your nutrition, your energy is in the roots. And in the summertime, it's kind of like all over the place. When it's kind of in that medium period, in the springtime is when I like to collect. And then in the fall time can be a little tricky, but you're going to get good root growth because everything's going back down into the roots.
How important is the taproot when you're especially deciduous? Don't they need, you consider that taproot?
It is if it's big. I think I've gotten lucky with most of them. If it's a big taproot with a pine, I'm going to leave it in the ground. But with a deciduous tree, they're quite hardy. The cool thing about trees is they've evolved to take damage. If it's just one single tree and you're leaving no roots, then that could be a problem.
Same size as the root ball, you don't have to go deeper and then kind of hang on to the longer part of the taproot.
I don't worry about it as if I've got enough finer roots coming off to the side. Those finer roots will help sustain it. I'm also reducing the height of it, so it doesn't need as much. Any other questions?
More tickets.
More tickets.
Does anybody, I'll have to call for tickets.
All right.
Right, nice to meet you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. You are more than welcome to come up and check it out. I've also got all of these slides here. You're welcome to peruse. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thank you all.